Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Outside Shore Music, home of mastering MuseScore. Welcome to the MuseScore Café. Welcome to those of you who are returning. Welcome to those of you who are new. This is our regular session we do where we take a look at some aspect of creating music using MuseScore. And the theme for today's session, this is the third Wednesday of the month by my count, which makes it a score of the month. I'm going to take a piece of music, an existing piece of music that I have a PDF of, and I'm going to go about entering that music into MuseScore to see what issues come up. And in conjunction with the Practical Counterpoint course, right now we're working on Renaissance music. So I'm going to be using an actual Renaissance motet as my example, and we'll see a few really kind of specific things to that genre that come up, as well as just ordinary things of note input and all that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you the piece that we're going to work on, and yeah, it's a nice, interesting piece. This is Palestrina. This is a collection of motets from Palestrina. And let me get this the way I want it. There we go. Nuts. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So this particular motet. So first of all, the motets traditionally, just so you know, weren't necessarily given titles in the sense that we might think of a title. They are known by their incipits, their first lyrics. So, and of course I don't speak Latin, but fuit homo missus deo missus. Okay, that's the way this might be known. This thing that we see up at top here, this isn't actually necessarily the title of the piece. This is saying which mass or whatever it was designed to go with. There's different feast days in the Catholic Church and so forth, and this is saying which birthday of John the Baptist. I don't know, just guessing. This is what we're going to be looking at. We're going to enter some of that information, 13, that's just the number, in this collection, because this was a posthumously published collection, I believe. I'm pretty sure. So in any case, this is the piece we're going to be looking at. Some of the things you can see about it is it does use the cut time signature, but cut time not meaning 2/2, but meaning 4/2, right? We can see there's 4 half notes per measure, right? 4 half notes per measure. So I will be showing that, which I also put in a little tip this week. You'll see the clefs are these clefs that maybe this one here we don't use so much these days, the soprano clef. This was a very popular clef in the Renaissance and Baroque, not so much anymore, but that's what we have. And I'll show you how to enter the music that way, and then how to change it to treble clef to make it easier to read. This is the alto clef, which we do still use today for viola. Anyhow, it's really the only instrument that does. Few people other than violists or professional composers who do a lot of orchestration actually read alto clef. So again, I'll enter music in it and then show you how to change it. And then we have bass clef. But we also have these funny looking things before the score. What these are is this was an editorial thing. So the person who put this printed edition together worked from a handwritten manuscript or some earlier edition, and he is showing what the original clefs were that he was working from. This original clef here is not the soprano clef. You can see this C clef is centered on the second line. That is actually the mezzo soprano clef. At least that's the term we'd use today. Who knows what they called it in Latin, or whatever language someone might have talked about it in. But these days we call this the mezzo soprano clef. To the extent we talk about it at all. We don't, because it's not used today. So the editor here made the wise choice of rewriting from mezzo soprano to another clef that would be more familiar to his audience. Unfortunately, soprano clef was what was familiar to his audience, not so familiar to us today. In any case, I'll show you how to add that. It's a little bit involved, so I'm not going to start off with that. We're going to add that a little bit later, all right? And similarly, the bass clef was actually originally this other clef. See that the two dots here center on the F line, the second to top line. Here, the two dots center on the middle line. This is sometimes called the baritone clef. At least that's what MuseScore calls it. It's, again, not a clef we typically use, so the editor wisely rewrote it here into bass clef, but is showing us what the original clefs were just for, historical interest. All right, so let's go ahead and get started entering this. I want to show you, as I often do in these sessions, I've made a separate window with a reduction of that score, and I'm going to use a Chromebook feature where you can float the window. And when you float the window, that means it will continue to display even while we work in MuseScore. So I know we talk about this each week, and I never remember the thing, but on Windows, there's a thing called Power Toys that you can download from the Microsoft website. I guess maybe someone has a link they want to post. Mac OS has a feature built in where you can do this also. But it's a nice feature because it means I can work in MuseScore and still see the score that I'm working on. So I'm going to go ahead and I guess it doesn't want me to get any smaller than that, but that's fine. I'm going to create a new score. Now notice it's 4 staves. They are not necessarily alto, tenor, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. This is really essentially 2 sopranos, an alto, and a bass. Whether or not that's how I actually do it or not, I will see. I'm going to create my new score here, Control N to open a new score. And I'm going to choose, I guess, if I think about this, this is essentially SATB. It just has different clefs involved. So I think I am going to use the SATB template. I'm going to come over to Choral and just pick the SATB template because it has some nice things set up for me. And so I just choose that tempo, that template, go on to the next. And I will enter as the title just 13 because that's all that's actually a title. In the original version, the composer was like, on the title page. It's not on the score, so I'm not going to bother entering a composer. I'm not going to bother entering a subtitle or anything else. I'm just going to click Done. So this is going to set up my score for me, and the first thing you'll notice is, some of you, if you are thinking ahead, you'll know that because I didn't enter a subtitle or a composer, it tries to give me a default one, so I'm just going to select those and delete them. All right? So I have that. The next thing I want to do now is I'm going to put in that little bit of text, that in nativitate, all that business. And oh, now I see what that thing is doing. Okay. So that's bold-faced text at the top. As far as how I'm going to enter that, what type of text I'm going to use, I'm going to want that to, if I generate individual parts from this, which is very typical in Renaissance music. In a lot of choral music, you don't bother generating individual parts. You read off the score. Renaissance music, typically, there wasn't even a score. All they published was the parts. And so people were accustomed to reading off parts. So we're going to want this title or that subtitle, whatever it is, to appear on all the parts. So I want to use some form of system text for it. So I guess I'll use actual system text. The shortcut for system text is Control-Shift-T. And now I can enter my system text in Nativitate Ioannis Baptiste birthday. And of course, I'm butchering pronunciation. We see that in the original it was bold, so let's go ahead and make it bold. Come over to the Properties panel and click the bold button. And now it's bold. Now I also see that it was kind of pushed over to the side there to align with the system bracket. Um, yeah, I could do that. I can certainly push this over, but I'm not going to worry about making those kind of manual adjustments quite yet. I'm going to get some more stuff set up first. I usually don't try to do manual adjustments until I'm deeper into the score because manual adjustments will tend to shift as the score changes, right? These measures are very narrow right now because they're empty, but as I enter notes into them, they're going to get wider, and that might change my perception of what kind of manual adjustments I need. So manual adjustments typically I won't do until later. So let's get the key signature here. The key signature I should have entered in the original box and didn't, but it's not too late. I will come over to the palettes, and key signature is 1 flat. And so now I have my 1 flat key signature. I want that time signature, which I also could have entered in the dialog when creating the score. I just never think of it. So, do as I say, don't do as I do. I recommend using the time signature setting in the score wizard. I just never think of it myself. So I want to change that time signature to 4:2, but displaying as cut time. And as I showed in this week's tip, I can do that by coming to time signatures. Actually, I'm going to switch to it's a tricky little thing here. I'm trying to move that window. I'm going to switch to my default or my demo workspace because right now I've got my complicated workspace. My complicated workspace here, which shows all my things, and I want to go back to my demo workspace, which is a little cleaner, and make sure that then, therefore, if I need to add any palettes or add things to my toolbars, you can see that. Richard's asking if I've activated closed captioning, and by which I assume you mean the thing that shows my keystrokes on the keyboard. The thing is, I keep setting that up and then it turns itself off, and I frankly don't know why. Don't know why it happens, and I've just never succeeded in figuring that system out. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm just going to narrate my keystrokes. Now, if you're seeing my words, my spoken words on the screen, you have probably enabled captioning yourself in the browser or in some setting. Because I didn't do anything special, and I don't think, I don't even think I have the ability to turn on closed captioning. But since you brought it up, I suppose I should check. Maybe they snuck a new feature in while I wasn't looking. Is there some sort of closed caption feature here? I don't see any new buttons or anything that would suggest it. So I'm going to guess that no, I didn't, and it's something that you've done at your end to enable it. Anyone else want to chime in and say if you're seeing any closed captioning? All right, so let's get that time signature happening. When I go to the time signatures palette, there is no 4:2 that you see, but I'm going to click on more, and then I'm going to go ahead and since I didn't click something in the score first, I will just drag that in here, and now it says 4:2. And I'm going to go ahead and right-click this thing and go to Time Signature Properties and say I want it to display with the cut time symbol. So now it's going to behave as 4:2, but display as cut time. Now, as I showed in my tip, I could just copy this cut time symbol to another staff and then it would apply to the rest of the score because it only applied to this one staff so far. But because I might do this a lot, and you might be doing this a lot if you're doing it at all, I'm going to add this to my palette. I'm going to Control-Shift-Drag it to my palette, which isn't going to work because of a bug that has existed for quite a long time and we've never known what caused it. And just yesterday we figured it out. It was the fact of opening that More section of the palette that broke the ability to customize it. And the workaround is going to be I am going to close the palette window by pressing F9 and then reopen it. Now I'm going to be able to Control Shift drag that cut time in here. So now I have two cut time symbols, and I want to make sure that I remember that this is 4.2. So I'm going to right click it and go to its properties and change the name of it to 4.2. Now if I hover over it in the palette, it'll display as 4.2, and so I'll know that this one is regular cut time and that is 4.2. So that's how I've got that set up now. Okay, so I have things set up that I need to have set up, and I'm ready to kind of start opening, entering notes. And yes, that floating window is super useful. I do have to say it does get a little annoying, and I'm constantly having to move it out of my way, but it's still quite useful. And macOS has a similar feature built in. I just don't know how to access it. Maybe someone else does, but it does. Supposedly there is a way to access a similar feature in macOS. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with the second line here, entering the notes, because it's the one that starts at the beginning, and then I might be able to copy and paste to other staves because I'm assuming there's some imitative counterpoint going on here. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to get this clef right, because I don't want to have to read these notes. I don't want to, like this note I can tell is a C because it's on the bottom line, and that clef is on the bottom line. But I'm going to continue. I don't want to have to, every single note I entered, have to do the math to figure out what note it is. I mean, yes, I showed how I can sight sing a line by just following it horizontally, but it doesn't mean I know all the note names. And then if I move from staff to staff, I'll lose my place. So I just want to get that clef entered into the score and then click the notes in, or otherwise get them in a way that that I don't have to read that clef. So let's open the clefs palette, and that soprano clef doesn't show up in the default section, but it does under more. Here it is, the soprano clef. You can see that other guy there, the mezzo soprano clef. So I want to add the soprano clef. I will click the clef in my score first, and now click the soprano clef, and it changes to soprano clef, except I did it for the wrong staff. So let's undo that, come down to the alto part, and one more try, or the second part anyhow. And I'm adding soprano clef. All right, so I've added my soprano clef, and now I can start adding these notes. Well, the first note we have is a brev, right? It's this whole note with the sticks on either side, square whole note with sticks on either side. It's called a brev, or a double whole note. Yeah, that's what I need to enter. And if you haven't already entered it into your toolbar, you won't see brev on your toolbar. Now, you don't need it on your toolbar, because if you know the shortcuts 4, 5, 6 for eighth quarter half, then you know 7 is whole note. Brev is going to be 8. I don't need it on my toolbar to enter a brev. I can just come in here and type 8, and brev is now selected even though I don't see it on the toolbar. And if I now click on the staff, you can see the note is getting ready to enter as a brev. And so if I click it, it enters it. Let me turn my volume back up. So that is now entered as a brev. But if you want to see it on the toolbar, we can get it. I'm going to click the gear icon to customize my toolbar, and I'm just going to open the eye icon next to double whole note, which is what it's called in the palette. And now there it is on the palette also, not the palette, the toolbar, so that you can enter notes that way. So now I'm going to start entering some more notes here. I'll just enter a handful here, and then I'll get some lyrics in. So the next few notes, again, I don't necessarily know their pitches, but I can see it's a whole note, so I'll type 7, and I'll just click these notes in. I'm not a big fan of clicking notes in general, but when it's necessary, I find it useful. So now 6 for half note. And then this guy, I can call that G and an A. I know it's not a G and an A, but whatever. I'm just entering the notes. And, it's playing, but extremely, extremely quiet. And that is because MuseSound's choir is ridiculously quiet for absolutely no good reason. So I'm just going to peg all of these to the top. And then they will play back a little more reasonably. So Dave was asking if the next note was also going to be a brev. The next note in the actual score is not a brev, right? It's just a whole note. But if you were asking, would it, if I just clicked another note, would it stay a brev? Well, yes, that's how note input works in MuseScore. Once you select a duration, it stays in effect until you change the duration. So brevs are no different than other note values. All right, I'll close the mixer again and come back to entering notes. I want a whole note, so 7, and then this guy here, and then a half note, so this guy here, and now some quarter notes, so 5, and this guy, that guy, this, and then 7 for a whole note. Oops, this is why I don't use the mouse, because it's just really easy for me to miss. But that's fine. I will use, I'm going to use the shortcut, which is normally Alt-Shift-Up to transpose that note diatonically. Control-Shift-Up moves notes diatonically from thing to thing. And so, Dave, again, I cannot emphasize this enough. If you are having a problem with something, start a new thread, give precise steps to reproduce the problem, and I'm happy to look. So, I want to finish out that line of lyric there. So I want to get that half note in there. So I'll type 6 and then enter that note. And now I'm going to stop for now because I want to talk about the lyrics next. So I'll hit escape to leave note input mode. And now I want to start thinking about lyrics. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so that I can see the lyrics a little better. There's a couple things to note here, and you're going to have to make some choices here about whether you want to honor an older style or whether you want to make it more sensible for modern musicians. And that is these dashes here. I don't know Latin, but I do know that homo or almo is one word. I know deo is one word. Those things that look like underscores are in fact dashes. They are hyphens. They're, that's hyphenating a word, as opposed to the melisma line that appears at the end of a syllable, right? At the end of a word, we're used to seeing that kind of low hyphen. Normally, hyphens are mid-range. So I'm going to enter that as a hyphen because logically it is a hyphen, but I'm going to show you how you can make it display down low if you're writing for, 16th century musicians who expect it. If you're writing for modern musicians, I will not recommend doing this, but I want to show you how. So I'm going to enter the lyrics. I've selected that note, Control L or Command L on Mac, FU hyphen IT space HO hyphen MO space MIS hyphen SUS. Now, notice we don't see the hyphen between Miss Sus, right? We don't see the hyphen there. That is because the editor there said, well, I'm trying to make things really tight here. There's not room for a hyphen without making that measure wider, so I'm not going to put the hyphen in. MuseScore does the same thing. If there's not room for a hyphen, MuseScore will not add more room unnecessarily for it. In this case, there was more room because MuseScore spacing is a little wider than this edition. I'll show you how we can make it narrower if you want. But for now, I'm entering things logically. That is a hyphenated word, whether we see the hyphen or not. So I'm entering it that way. Then we'll worry about how it displays later. So space, space, day, hyphen, O, space, FU, hyphen, 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 it. All right. I'm going to now save the score because I so often forget to do that. And then I could be in trouble. So I'll go to a folder that I haven't created yet, but I'm going to have a new cafe folder here. Just for scores. I've got an old Cafe folder buried somewhere else in my Mastering MuseScore folder, but I should have one in Outside Shore Music. So I have Outside Shore Music Cafe, and I am now going to give this a proper name. This is Palestrina Fuit Homo Missus Deo, and I know I'm butchering pronunciation, but that's how I'm going to call it, because that's the first line of first few words of the lyric. Okay, so taking a moment to save, there we go. All right. I can see I have a typo here. That's an MO, not an ME. So let's talk about a couple of those customizations that I might want to make. One of them I said, if you know that your audience is accustomed to reading Renaissance scores that display the hyphen down low, let me show you how to do that, because MuseScore does support it. This is a relatively new feature, I think. I don't think it was in MuseScore 3. I'm not even sure it was in the initial MuseScore 4, although I could be wrong. I'm going to go to Format, Style, and then under the Lyrics section here, I'm going to see a setting for dash Y position ratio. My best assumption about what this is it says if this is the height of a character, of the average character, is called the X height, how high lowercase letters are, 60% of the X height, like 100% would be the top of it, 0% would be the bottom of it. And so it's saying that by default it's going to be putting these hyphens at 60% of that X height. I want it to be at the bottom, so I'm just going to change that value to 0. And when I do that, notice now the line, the hyphen is now down at the bottom. So if you want that, you can have it. I have never really played with that setting before. In fact, I've literally don't think I've ever used it. But yeah, if I go up to 1.0, then it displays right at the top of the lowercase, is what's called the lowercase x height. It's right at that level. It's called the x height because it's actually using the letter X, not X as in coordinate system horizontal. That is a little confusing. It's just a font terminology that you don't need to know here. But in any case, 0 is the value that will give me that look. So I'm going to just go ahead and leave it there because I never use it, and I'm going to play with it and just let it be there. So I have that there now, and now I want to talk about the spacing. The fact that the spacing is obviously quite a bit tighter in the original here. That's not necessarily a good thing, but it means that if I try to enter this music, I'm not going to be able to fit as many measures onto the system as they did. Now, in part, that is because I have my staff names here, and they don't, although they do have those incipit clefs, so I'll talk about those in a little bit. There is a bug that just appeared in 4.3. It's already fixed for the upcoming 4.3.1. You know, anytime there's a X.Y release 4.3, it's got a lot of new features, a lot of new stuff. There's going to be some bugs that need to be fixed. Well, so far there's only been 2 bugs of consequence that have been reported, and one is if I select that and press delete, it doesn't delete, whereas it had that was a feature that had been added like a couple years ago and it broke, but you can still delete it, don't worry. I'm going to double click that thing, and now I'm just going to delete it from here. Or I could just say I don't want to see staff names at all. In fact, I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Format, Style, and I think, you know, it's actually, I'm not remembering now. Is there an option to not show staff names at all? Do I remember that being a thing? Why do I think there's one to only show the instrument name, to not show it if there's only one instrument. Is there a way to not show staff names at all? Maybe there isn't, and so maybe I do need to actually delete those. Someone can fill me in. I'm blanking on that. Anyhow, I'm going to double click that again, and I'm just going to clear out the staff names, and I'm going to do that for each of the staves. So I don't have to keep closing the dialog. I'm going to press apply, and notice the soprano just disappeared. Then I'll click the down arrow, which moves me to the next staff, the alto. I will delete its staff names, apply, down arrow, delete this guy's staff names, apply, down arrow, and delete this guy's staff names, apply. And so yeah, it'll just be a single delete when 4.3.1 comes out, which my guess is they're going to wait to see if there's any more bugs reported. But so far, the only significant bugs in 4.3 are that one, inability to delete staff names, and one where if you're using synthesized instruments, by which I mean like sine waves and all the things that are designed to emulate a synthesizer as opposed to emulate real instruments, like flute, those are real instruments. These aren't affected, but the synthesizer instruments like sawtooth wave and some of the other things like that, atmospheric effect. If you create a score with those instruments, they play back as piano by default, and you have to manually set up the right sound. So that's another bug that was reported and fixed already for the upcoming 4.3.1, whenever that happens. All right, so I have this thing now kind of started the way I want, and my claim is that probably that soprano line is the same line as this, but imitated a measure and a half later. I'm going to do that first, then I'll worry about, no, I'm going to do the spacing first since I talked about spacing. I'm going to go to Format, Style, and I'm going to show you the global style settings that control spacing. Now, what I don't know is the staff size. Of course, I'm working from a picture. This was scanned, and now I'm looking at it. There's no way of knowing what the actual physical size of that staff is. Probably it's a little smaller than mine. So in fact, that's almost certainly true because choral music is almost always printed a little smaller than instrumental music. Why? Because instrumental music you read on a music stand, which is a little further away. Choral music, you sit there and hold right in front of you, so it's closer to you. So choral music is almost always printed a little smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and get that first. I'm going to go to Format, Page Settings, and the staff space. This is the unit that determines the staff size. This is literally the space between two staff lines. A staff is 4 spaces tall, right? 5 lines, 4 spaces. So a staff is 4 spaces tall. The default staff size of staff space size is 1.75 millimeters. Multiply that by 4, you'll find out 7 millimeters is the default staff size. Whereas something more like 6 millimeters would be more typical for choral music. Maybe somewhere in between. So if you want 6 millimeter for your staff size, divide that by 4, 1.5 is the staff space size. Or you can just eyeball it, doesn't really matter. But I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to put 1.5 as my staff space, and that's going to make everything smaller. And so already I can fit more on the measure, on the line. Now, can I fit enough to get 3 more measures in here? Well, right now I've got 3 more measures, but I don't necessarily believe that I'll be able to once I enter their notes. But let me go ahead and do it because there's no way to know without finding out. So I'm going to go in here and enter real quickly those notes. So I want a half note, 6 dot, and then I want this note here, and then 5, that note there, 7, that note there, 6, tie, and then also still 6, this guy, 7, yeah, no, I say F, it's not an F, right? So clearly, I'm not fitting as many measures still as they are, right? So I'm going to need tighter spacing if I want to do that. Now, one perfectly valid question is how important is it to mimic the original formatting? Well, this depends on your goal. If your goal is to completely mimic the existing part because you're trying to replace an existing part and everyone else in the choir has the original part, but you're doing a new version of it because you need a different font or whatever, I don't know. And therefore it's important to have all the system breaks in the same spot, then yes, you're going to want to do whatever it takes to mimic the original system breaks. Most of the time, though, there's not that important to mimic the original system breaks. You just want to make intelligent choices yourself. But I will say, if you're copying an existing score, it's kind of nice to copy the existing formatting as far as where the breaks are because it helps you keep your place. So I am going to try to make some tighter spacing just to try. I could just make a smaller staff size and then zoom in. That would work also. But I'm going to show you how to get tighter spacing also. Format, style, and then measures. There are two main settings here, well, three really, that affect things. There's the minimum measure width, which affects things like how wide is a measure that has nothing in it but a breath. And like how wide is that measure? Right now, the minimum is set to 8. Well, I can turn that down and say I really don't need I don't need anything more than say 4. I think the MuseScore 3 default was 5. I'm just going to go with 5 for now. Then there's the spacing ratio and the minimum note distance. Let me tell you what these are because it's useful to know what these two settings are, even though it's not super important to understand it normally. The minimum note distance is basically what it says. How close together can notes be allowed to be? And you can see that this editor is allowing these notes to be quite close. Look at those quarter notes. There is way less than one staff space between this note and that note. If I go to the top staff, it's treble clef, that F and that G. The space between that F and G is way less than a staff space, and it appears to be considerably less than half a staff space. I don't know exactly what it is, and eighth notes are potentially closer together still, like these two. So I'm just going to turn down that setting down to 0.1, which is like the minimum it goes. I can always add more space later. So that minimum space, just changing that minimum space, notice what effect it had. It suddenly gives me a lot more measures because now my notes are a lot closer together because it is allowing less space. It is allowing there to be less space because that spacing, that minimum distance is applied to the algorithm is actually fairly complicated, but I will say you can act as if that minimum note distance is for sixteenths and smaller, and then all longer note values take more space. So it's a little more sophisticated than that, but for practical purposes, let's say minimum note distance applies to 16th notes, and then eighth notes take more space, quarter notes take more space, half notes take more space. How much more space? That is determined by the spacing ratio. The spacing ratio being set to 1.5 here by default, this means that a half note by default takes 1.5 times as much space as a quarter note. That's a pretty typical value. Another pretty typical value is 1.414, the square root of 2, because that means a whole note will take exactly twice as much space as a quarter note. You don't want a half note to take twice as much space as a quarter note normally. It makes your music too stretched out, but occasionally you want that, so a spacing ratio of 2 will allow that. It'll allow a half note to get twice as much as a quarter note. So smaller values of spacing ratio basically mean that notes space more evenly. Larger values of spacing ratio means their durations has a larger effect. Well, if you look at this measure here, you can see this whole note is taking quite a lot more space than those quarter notes. So I certainly don't want to make this spacing ratio any less because it's already the case that do I have that note entered? I guess I don't have that passage entered, but you can see here that whole note is taking more space than the half note's taking more space than the quarters. I'm not seeing offhand an obvious reason to mess with that setting. I'm going to leave it alone. So that is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to save my score again. Um, uh, Frank is giving me a useful thing about like that the soprano clef being one space below, so I can do that mental math. And yeah, I can do that mental math, but I'm going to forget it as soon as I have to enter music on another clef. So I don't actually find that to be as helpful as I wish it would be. If I only had to deal with one clef, I would deal with it absolutely. But I'm going to be moving back and forth between clefs, and I'm going to forget which clef uses which thing that I don't know because I am not smart enough to keep that stuff straight. um, oh, the stretching commands. So yeah, those you can also stretch measures individually. But I wouldn't recommend that because that's one of those manual override things that is going to then get messed up as soon as you start entering more notes. Whatever decisions you make early on are going to look wrong later. Style settings are safer to change right away. Stretch commands, especially those per measure stretch commands, because what they really do is say, make this measure out of proportion to everything else on that system. Well, I don't want these measures out of proportion relative to each other. I want them in proportion to each other. I want all the measures stretched by the same amount, including new measures that I have yet to add, right? So the stretch commands are for deliberately tweaking measures to make them out of proportion to get something to line up the way you need it or whatever, or on one particular system to squeeze those measures closer together so you can fit an extra measure. Stretch is useful for that, but it is not the general way to go about dealing with spacing. Those style settings are. All right, so I've got those notes in there. So next, I'm going to try that copy and paste thing. I want to see if copying and pasting that alto line to the soprano line is going to give me the right answer. Well, that soprano line starts mid-measure, so I'm going to have to enter a rest here. So I'll enter 7, 0 to enter that whole rest, because that way now I have a place to paste. I'm now going to select, I'm just going to select that whole passage up until the end of the lyrics there, Control C, and now come up to this spot here and Control V. Oops, Control V. And those notes are now entered. And as I look at it, C, E, F, E, F, C, E, D, C, F, G, A, B, C, B. Yeah, it's almost exact imitation, right? And so, yes, Dave, you can apply the stretch commands to more than one measure, but then it's still the case that it's only going to apply to those measures. And if you insert new measures or make other changes later, those measures are still going to be out of proportion. So again, those are things, those fine-tuning adjustments are things you do at the end of the score if you have a special reason to, but they're not the way to just get consistently smaller spacing, including to measure you haven't even entered yet. So this imitation here is pretty exact, except it's the wrong octave, right? So Control Up fixes the octave. And now you can see everything is exactly the way it is in the original score here until this measure here, where the original had C. I always forget my octave numbering. I don't know why I can never remember octave numbering. That's 4. C, middle C is C4, right? There's so many different octave number systems I can never remember. That is my failing. But middle C in the system used by MuseScore is C4. So this C here is C5. The alto part leapt up to the F, but the soprano part leaps down to the F, obviously to keep it from getting too high. So I'm going to select from there to the end of that passage and Control down, because the imitation is exact as far as the note names. It's just an octave displacement that happens mid-line. So what we have here is a very typical thing, and this is something we've been talking about in the counterpoint course, canon, right? So we have this line that starts happening, and then the next line comes in with the exact same melody. In this case, it's canon at the octave. It's canon at the octave, and then it shifts with that displacement mid-measure. So if I actually play this thing, it should sound like something. Let's Hello. Oh, I saved the score. Sorry. Okay, wait a minute. Oh, okay. I'm still reading the wrong clef. Sorry about that. I'm All right. So, were there any other differences that I missed here? Yes, I know that the rhythm here at the end is a little different. That, um, in fact, the lyric is different also. Right? So, that day, oh, instead of going to fuit, it goes to something else. It goes to miss dash, 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 dash. And in fact, it doesn't even resolve for a while yet. I need more notes. This guy here is a quarter note. So I'll select that note, change it to a quarter by pressing 5, select the next rest, press N for note input mode, and finish entering that line. There's the B flat, 7, A, 6, G, A, 5, F, G, A, B flat, 6, C. There we go. So now I have those notes and I can come back to that lyric and enter miss dash 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 until I get to that A and enter the sus. Then I can press space and I believe that ah is a single word. And that's why notice that this is a dashed line here, right? Dashed line here, or dotted line. And apparently in this particular edition, melisma lines, because these dashes are solid, those are really hyphens. This line is dashed or dotted, and that's how they apparently indicate what now would just be a solid underscore. I don't think MuseScore has any way of doing that, of making those melisma lines be dotted, but since it's not commonly done that way anymore, I'm not going to worry about it. I suppose I should go back to that style and see if that is a thing. Format, style, and I do see your question, Kevin. I will get to that in a second. Uh, lyrics, was there an option for dotted? Come on. Dotted melisma. There's thickness, there's pad, there's alignment, but I don't see an option to make dotted melisma lines. I didn't really expect there to be one. I will say that for MuseScore 4.4, there are some additional lyrics formatting and some additional lyrics features coming for 4.4 that are being worked on right now, including some better collision avoidance and some other things. So Kevin's asking about Stretto, and oh, and Patrick's got a really good question also. So Stretto is a confusing term to use, and I'm sorry in some ways that I introduced it when I did. You can only, the word stretto only makes sense if, first of all, what stretto means for people who don't know is it means repetition, an imitation that starts before the thing is finished. So it applies if you have a fixed length thing you're imitating. In a fugue, we have a subject. That subject is a fixed length, maybe 4 measures or whatever it is. If you ever have a place where the imitation of that 4-measure segment starts before the 4 measures are done, that is stretto. But canon, there is no fixed length. So it's always overlapping constantly, infinitely, until it decides to stop. So stretto as a term is like canon, but the specific case of a fixed length thing. So if you don't have a fixed length thing, you can't even talk about whether it's stretto or not. Stretto, by definition, applies when you have a fixed length thing that then The imitation starts before that fixed length thing is done. Here, there is no fixed length thing. This line is never done until the end of the piece, right? There is no subject of a motet. It's just notes that just keep going. So Patrick's question is about the hyphenation. And this is one where, I know, Patrick, you sing in choirs and maybe others do as well. Um, Usually, um, the answer is yes. You hyphenate according to the normal hyphenation rules, and double consonants you split. Miss sus. And yes, you're supposed to be smart enough to know not to hold out that S. You would sing miss sus. You would know to sing that. The thing is, modern choir music doesn't have such long melismas like this as often as Renaissance music. So a modern musician might look at this and get confused and think, oh my gosh, should I be holding out that S? Probably they're going to realize no. But you might, if writing for a modern audience and you had any doubt about it, rehyphenate it to MI-SSUS. But this hyphenation where you split double consonants, that's the way normal hyphenization goes, right? If you're typing into a word processor and you reach the end of the line and word wrap kicks in and it's going to automatically hyphenate that word, it's going to put MIS dash SUS. Hyphenization normally happens between consonants if there's a double consonant. And it's just sort of expected that you're going to figure it out when singing. But these cases where there's these really long melismas, I could totally see those throwing people. All right, so I've done a lot of things here. I've worked with a few different clefs. I've used some copy and paste. I've done some lyric stuff, done some formatting things. I didn't do the one thing yet that I said I was going to do of showing how to do these little incipit clefs. Now, I'm not going to recommend that you do this. I mean, unless you have a real specific reason because you're, trying to publish this in some music research journal that requires those. For most purposes, knowing what the original clef was is just not important, not relevant. But it is kind of a useful feature to know about how I might do this. There's a lot of, now MuseScore doesn't have a direct way of just doing that, but it's got a good way of faking it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you the process and then you get to decide, man, do I want to mess with that or not? What I'm going to do is I am going to insert another measure in front of this one, but I'm also going to put a frame in it. The reason I'm going to put a frame in it is because I want the bracket to show up after that measure. All right, so this is a little convoluted. I'm going to go through it quickly, and then if you need to do it again, we can discuss it further elsewhere. But I'm going to insert a frame in front of that measure. So plus on the toolbar, frames, insert horizontal frame. And now I've got this horizontal frame here. Now I'm going to select that frame, and I want to insert a measure before that. So click that plus, measures, insert one measure before. So now I have my measure, my frame, and then the thing. So far, so good. Now what I need to do is make everything else go away. Well, first of all, I want to change that clef because the whole point of doing this is I want to show a mezzo-soprano clef instead. So I'm going to click this thing and come over to the clefs palette and show the mezzo-soprano clef, and then come back to the beginning of the score, the real beginning of the score, and change it back to soprano clef. When I do that, notice it shows me this kind of courtesy clef before the frame. In the properties panel, I can make that go away, or I can just click that courtesy clef and press V to make it invisible. They do the same thing. It also lost my customization of the time signature, which would bother me more if I wanted the time signature there anyhow, but I don't. I don't want the time signature in that incipit, so I'm going to make it invisible. And now I'm going to come to the beginning of the score and add, remember I added that time signature to my palette, so now I can add it to the score there. And now I get to see my cut time there. I guess I never did add it back to the palette at the beginning, and it's bothering me that they're showing inconsistently now, so I guess I will just go ahead and add add it to the beginning also. So I have that going. I also need to add that funny baritone clef here, so I'm going to change this clef to the baritone clef. Again, it's not a common clef, so it's under here under more, but there it is, baritone clef. And then change the real clef to bass clef. All right, so I'm now getting kind of close to what I want, but I got way too much stuff that I don't want to see. So one thing I don't want to see is this beginning bracket. So I'll select it and press V. I also don't want to see these beginning bar lines. So I'm going to try to select those, but you can't select the initial bar line in a score. That is just a thing where you can't click it because it's generated, I think is the reason. But I can get to it anyhow. I'm going to click the clef and then Alt left moves me to that bar line, and now V. Similarly, I can go to this clef, Alt left gets me to the bar line, press V. Because it's the bar lines are drawn staff by staff. So go to this clef, Alt left, V. And then finally this clef, Alt left, V. Okay, now I don't want to see these rests, so I'm just going to select all four measures and press V. Well, actually, I'm not going to press V. I'm going to go, because if I press V, it toggles that other one back visible again, and other things visible. I just want to come over to the properties panel and say, hey, everything in here, let's make sure it is invisible. Make sure that the visible box is unchecked for everything in those measures. The key signature didn't hide from that, which is good. Now I want to make those measures go away. I want to make, because the incipit clefs are there only for the alto and bass, and I don't need to see the soprano or tenor at all. So I'm going to right click the measure. I told you this was a little involved. Go to Measure Properties. And up at the top is a thing that we almost never ever use, and I don't know that I've ever used this in any demonstration before, but it shows each of the staves and for that measure whether it's going to be visible or not. I can turn off the visibility of the first and third staff. And now when I hit OK, you will see, bingo, they disappeared. All right, so what else is going on? I see some end bar lines I need to hide also. So let me click this guy and hit Alt-Right until I get to that bar line and press V. In this measure, nuts, it looks like the bar line's there also, so I'm going to have to get to that somehow. I guess I'm going to get there by going to this clef and hitting Alt-Left a few times until I reach that bar line and press V. Here I can select the rest. And I'm selecting the rest and then using Alt-Right to get over to that bar line. Except it's not working as I expect, so I'll try this clef and use Alt-Left until I reach the bar line. And you can tell you're at the bar line because the thing will tell you're on the bar line. So I've now hidden pretty much everything that I need to hide. I haven't gotten this guy yet, so let me get that one. But it's hard to tell because I'm seeing all the grayed out stuff, right? If I now go to the Publish tab up here, it shows me a preview, and I can now see that I do in fact have those incipits, but I failed to make that bar line invisible. So I'm going to come back to the Score tab and try that again. I got the clef selected, Alt-Left a few times until I'm on the bar line, and then press V to make it invisible. There we go. So now when I go to the Publish tab, it looks pretty close to what I expect, except I don't want to see that gap between this incipit measure and the bracket. Ooh, I also somehow lost that bracket. Yeah, I told you this is involved, right? That's because I accidentally hid that bracket too. Let me select that thing and press V to make it visible again. Oh my gosh, look at that. It's like all or nothing. Is it not possible to make only the outer bracket visible? I think that was something someone made a feature request on. I guess it's not possible to show only this bracket but not that bracket. Not so sure. But the other thing I need to do is make that frame kind of disappear. Um, so I'm going to set its width down to 0. And now that frame has disappeared. Then I can also do the thing that Dave was talking about of using the stretch commands to reduce the stretch of that. Or you can also go to the Appearance tab, and where it says Measure Width, lessen this value, but you'll find it doesn't make a huge difference for those incipit measures. You're never going to get them quite as narrow as you want, but it's not too bad. When I go back to my Publish tab, yeah, this looks kind of close. And you could keep fiddling to get things closer and closer. I know that was a lot of stuff I just went through in a short period of time, but I wanted to show how to do it. So there you go. The one thing I didn't show yet that I said was going to be here, so I'm just going to quickly do that, is editorial accidentals. Because this score, if I look at the score here, you'll see eventually there is a natural sign on a note that is not, it's what's called an editorial natural. It wasn't in the score. It's one that a performer would have known to do themselves. That's how leading tones were handled back in the day. So I'm going to show you how to do one of those. If I want this B flat right here to be turned into a B natural, using one of those, what I'm going to do is, so that it plays back as a B natural. Oh, I'm in publish mode. I need to move back to score mode. All right. So B flat is selected. I'm going to go ahead and click the accidental sign to put the accidental there. But rather than just drag this up, I could just drag it up. But again, it's one of those adjustments I don't trust is going to necessarily going to look good later. So I'm going to undo that. Instead, I'm going to take that natural sign, press V to make it invisible, but then I'm going to take that note, press Control T for staff text, and enter a natural sign into my staff text. That is Control Shift H. And now I have my natural sign displaying as text. Now it'll display and play back as expected. So there you go. All right, a lot of stuff covered, a lot of stuff that we don't see every day because, Renaissance music has some different conventions. But that hopefully gives you an idea how to do some things that maybe you haven't ever seen before. And yeah, MuseScore's playback is going to stutter to keep up with me. So thanks everyone for the questions and comments and so forth. And for Dave, if you're talking about the snapshot and pasting the image back over as a way of doing those incipit clefs, frankly, that is what I would do. I think that's the easier way of doing the incipit clefs compared to what all that mess that I just made there. So yes, that is absolutely an option as well. Anyhow, there you go. So this is me entering this motet here. Tomorrow, Music Masterclass, we'll be looking at our first steps towards actually creating a motet. We've been looking at canons, and as we saw, the beginning of this piece is basically a canon, but the canon broke right there. That is where the imitation stopped to be exact. The rhythm changed, right? But the imitation was exact up to that point. It was exactly a canon for 6 bars. So we're going to be looking at, and it's modal, right? It's written in whatever mode it's in. I haven't actually thought through it, but I guess Mixolydian maybe, if C is really the final here, and it's got a B flat in it. I don't know that that's really the case. We'll have to look at it more closely. But in any case, we're going to be looking at modal melodies tomorrow in Music Masterclass. So hope to see you then. All right. Hope you have a good day, good week. See you next time.